Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Work Smarter, Not Harder, GPT and Automation Hacks for Modern Advertisers. My name is Riley McLaughlin, and I'm the Content Manager here at Main Street ROI. And today we're very fortunate to have Fred Vallaeys of Optmyzr here. We're going to jump into the presentation here in a sec. Some quick housekeeping though before we get started. This presentation is being recorded, so what's going to happen is tomorrow morning you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and a link to the slides. So you'll get all of the slides for the presentation today. And we'll also take questions for Fred as well. So if you have any questions during the webinar, you should see a questions tab on your screen. So if you just put your question in there, and we'll run through those questions at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Fred.
All right, thanks Riley. Thanks everyone for attending. So my name is Fred Vallaeys, and I've been having way too much fun with generative AI, so I wanted to come on today and share a couple of the tips and tricks that I've been doing. Hopefully take you into a little bit of the more advanced stuff besides the usual prompt engineering that I'm sure many of you are already quite active in. But yeah, so I'm Fred Vallaeys. I've done a couple of these webinars with Main Street ROI, so it's good to be back for another one in 2024 here. I was at Google for about 10 years back in the early 2000s, and then I started a company called Optmyzr. It's a PPC management software. Been named best PPC management software a number of times. So we really try to build tools and software to make lives of digital marketers easier. We know it's stressful and there's a lot of work managing search marketing campaigns, and we think technology can certainly help with that. So that's what I spend most of my days on now. I also did write a couple of books about artificial intelligence and how that impacts the lives of digital marketers. And basically, my job here today is going to help you unlevel the playing field. So technology like AI makes things generally easier for novices to do amazing things. But how do you take all of this technology to the next level to unlevel the playing field back in your favor, tip it back in your favor? So that's what I'm going to try to do here today. And really kind of this slogan here, you raised to the GPT equals magic. So how do we use AI to make you a more productive and effective person? And I'll share a couple of things that are really specific to search marketing, but also that could be applicable to SEO, and some that might just help you be a more effective person in your everyday life. And I think if you're better balanced as an everyday person, it also frees up your mind and your time to be better at your job. So it all kind of connects together. So just not everything you're going to see here today is directly applicable to a digital marketing role, but I think it should still help you in the end. But before we go into some of my GPT use cases, I also want to talk about the state of artificial intelligence, make some predictions about the future of PPC, and then we'll talk about how AI can take you to that next level. So I'm calling in today here from Silicon Valley. I'm in Mountain View, literally across the street from the place where the transistor was invented. So that ushered in the first wave of innovation that you see on the screen here, but that was in the 1960s, the microchips got invented. And basically, living in Silicon Valley, there's like these waves of technology that make things marginally less and less expensive. And by driving the marginal cost of things to zero, it just means that the way we do work really shifts. And so in the 1960s, that was the microchip. And basically the idea here is that we all use computers without even giving that a second thought. So if someone gives you a bunch of data and says, can you analyze it in Excel or spreadsheets? I don't think about that because there's effectively no additional cost to computing, and that's all driven by Moore's law. That's because microprocessors keep getting better and better and cheaper, so we can do amazing things without having to really think about, oh, you know, how much money is it going to cost me to run that spreadsheet? No, we don't think about that. And then in the 1990s, about 30 years later, the internet came along, and that made the marginal cost of distribution basically approach zero. So it's a big reason why we're all here today. We're digital marketers. We make our living on the internet. And that was facilitated by the fact that the distribution of whether it be content or websites or information all became basically free. And now 30 years later again, we're at that next wave of innovation, and that's generative AI. So we already have the cheap computing, we have the cheap distribution. Now the thing that we still spend a lot of time on is generating the stuff that we put onto that free distribution. But that's what generative AI, Gemini, GPT, etc., are going to make so much cheaper. And so that's what's so exciting. And in talking to some of the VCs here in the Silicon Valley, like the future vision is not a simple one, right? It's not making simple ad text with generative AI. It's things like, imagine in 5 years from now, there's going to be a type of a company like Netflix, but instead of generating content for the masses, you could go in and you could say, hey, I want to see a movie that has unicorns and superheroes and also a happy ending. And so it generates basically that movie on the fly for you. And that's a future that seems a bit far-fetched now, but that's where we're going to get to, because computing and Moore's law keeps getting cheaper. So all of the things that feed into this generative AI is just it's gonna make things possible that we didn't even think about today. To maybe bring that a little closer to home, imagine that you can make video ads, and Sora was just opened up to the public a couple of days ago from GPT, so the video generation model. But imagine that you can now make an ad for your car company, and instead of having a generic car driving through a generic landscape, what if you could customize these ads and put in a driver that kind of looks like the person you're showing the ad to, and maybe that car is driving through the actual city that person lives in, so it makes it more real. And so these are really cool applications that are going to become possible in the very near future, and that's really exciting to me. Now, also thinking about generative AI and like how excited we are and how many cool things we can do with it, this is going to be on the same cycle of all of these other things. And think back to the first websites that you visited back in the 1990s. They were pretty lame, right? They didn't do a whole lot. Think of how far they've come along, and think of the microchips, like the fact that we had floppy disks at one point. Nowadays, we don't even think about storage because it's so cheap and abundant and in the cloud. Well, think that generative AI, what we're using today, is as lame as microchips and the internet were at the time that they were invented. And imagine how much farther it's going to go, right? So, and that's kind of like why I'm super excited about the future of technology. Now, when we think about generative AI and the way that people use this, I really see three ways, and this is going to make a lot of sense, and maybe stating the obvious a little bit. But first, there's the efficiency zone, and imagine that you're a mountaineer and you want to climb and reach new heights, right? But to get to that peak, you have to drive the roads that you've driven a million times. And so if you think of generative AI in that sense, it's just about doing the things you already do and do really well, more efficiently and faster. So you do your current work with that. Now, that's really safe because you know exactly how the work should be done. So if you're using AI to generate ad text, if it fails and it generates a bad ad text, you can recognize that very easily. You can easily fix it because you know the tools to do that manually. So AI is just making you more efficient. It's speeding up some of the things you do, but you can also reel it in when it's going off the rails. Now, what's really exciting about AI is that it can also enable you to do things that you've always wanted to do, but maybe weren't that good at or didn't have the time to learn. And this is the growth zone. So this is where you as a mountaineer are going to be able to scale entirely new peaks and do that more efficiently thanks to AI. But what's important to me here is that think of AI as helping you to do things that you have a genuine interest in. So if you've always wanted to write Google ad scripts, or you've always wanted to be a more technical SEO, or you've always wanted to be better at statistics, while this AI can not only do the work for you, but it can also teach you how it's done. So as it does things, you can ask it, how did you get there? How can I do this? Like, help me understand it. And so as it still makes mistakes and it hallucinates, because you're taking a genuine interest in it, you're probably still going to see these mistakes. And if you find a mistake, you're going to be equipped to address that and fix it. Now, there's also the danger zone, and this is where you ask generative AI to do things that you have no interest in. So you say like, yeah, my boss told me that I need to do a better statistical analysis of like A/B testing my ads, but I really don't care. I really don't want to do statistics, right? So just have Gen AI do it. Okay, so it does it, and maybe it does it wrong. You present that work to your boss, and they call you out on all the mistakes that are in it because the AI was hallucinating. And the next thing you know, you get fired from your job because you were lazy and you just thought AI would do the work for you. And that's the danger zone, right? That's where you're going to fall off the cliff because you're just, yeah, basically being lazy and not learning anything. So these are the 3 ways that you can use AI. Now, at the end of the day, keep in mind, you're not going to be competing against AI. You're competing against other people who know how to use it better than you do. People who've come to classes like this, webinars like this, to learn how to use AI in a much more effective manner. Now, thinking that you're using or you're competing against other people who are using the same technology, think back to this Silicon Valley slogan from Apple from many decades ago, but it's about thinking different, right? We all have the same tools, but how do you apply them differently to do something more that your competitors aren't doing? And so we're going to go into a couple of those examples here in just a few minutes. But before we go there, a couple of predictions for the next year. So this being December, this is the time of year when people ask me, what do you think is going to happen in 2025? And also thinking a little bit further ahead beyond 2025. So the first prediction I'm going to put out there is that keywords are dead. Now, I think people have for a long time talked about keywords sort of dying on Google. The framing that I have for this is that AI and generative AI is basically becoming people's memories. You may have a pair of Meta glasses, so those are the glasses with the cameras in them, or you may have a pin like the limitless pin that you wear and that constantly records all the audio around you, or you may have one of the little devices right there like the humane pin or the rabbit pin. What's cool about these things is that they operate in the real world, they perceive your world, they hear your world. So with the limitless spin, at the end of the day, you can say, give me a rundown of the people I talked to, or the people I met at a conference, or the action items that I discussed. And because it's been listening to you the whole day, it can do that. But think about that more broadly. It is effectively your memory. If you, I was walking through New York for a couple of meetings a couple of weeks ago, and I see this beautiful couch in a store in the display window. And so I can use my Meta glass, I can take a picture of the thing and I can say, can you remember that? Or can you tell me more about this couch? Now, a couple of weeks later, when I'm actually ready to maybe redecorate my office, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that couch that I saw in New York. I don't have to remember the brand. I don't have to remember what the store was. I can just go to my generative AI memory and I can say, oh, you remember that couch that we saw in New York? And because it serves as your memory, it's able to find you that couch. Now think about what that means for keywords. It means that I don't have to go to Google and type in a very specific keyword with a brand, with a color, with the type of product. I can literally have a conversation with my assistant and just basically the word couch means a lot more than just a generic couch because it knows what couches I liked. It knows what I was looking at. It knows where I lingered a little bit more, spending more time looking at a certain couch. And so that is a fundamental shift in how people are going to connect with information because AI is becoming their memory. And so that is really scary as someone who does PPC, but it's also really exciting because it's a really different dynamic. Now, my second prediction is that the landing page is dead. And this is because ChatGPT and other generative systems and large language models, they foster a deeper exploration with a topic than traditional search. So I'm a Google fan. I was with Google in the very early days, but I think this is the first time in 30 years that I'm actually a little bit concerned for the future of Google, or at least the basic business model of you do a search and you get a bunch of blue links on a page and you have to go and parse through those. Now, obviously, Google is doing AI overviews. Microsoft has Copilot, and Microsoft put some data out there, and they said that if they show ads within the generative experience, so next to Copilot, those ads have a higher click-through rate. And that kind of validates the point I made before that keywords are dead, because the reason it has a higher CTR is because the memory of that LLM is better able to show the ads that actually matter to that user at that moment in time. Now, you would think that if they quickly get the ad they wanted, they would spend less time on the search page, but it turns out it's the opposite. They actually enjoy the interaction with the generative assistant so much that they end up spending more time with it and they go into deeper conversations. So if you look at a general consumer journey where they have so many different touch points at the different levels of the buying cycle, while they're going to spend more time with those chatbots. And then if you think about the purpose of your website and your landing page, which was to take someone from an ad and then to really convince them to buy from you and to show the unique value propositions and the benefits of your product and your service, well, a lot more of those conversations are going to shift to the chatbot. So by the time someone comes to your landing page, really the only thing they may want to do is figure out where is that button where I can buy the product. I already know everything about it. My generative assistant already told me this is the thing that we've agreed on I should purchase. So the landing page, the role of the landing page just becomes very transactional. And so I think for that reason, the way that we think about landing pages is going to dramatically shift over the next couple of years. Now, that then leads into conversions themselves will happen differently. So think of typical behavior you see nowadays. People go to the generative assistant, the large language model, and they have a conversation. And so I'm going to take a trip to Mexico, and I want to figure out what activities I should do in Mexico. Well, I've done that through the LLM. At the end of the day, it says, okay, these are 3 things you might want to do, but I can't book those things. I use Google as a transaction engine to find those vendors and make a booking with them. Now, that's using Google to go to that landing page to do the transaction, but those conversions are going to shift, because why would I want to leave the large language model and my chat assistant if it could actually do that conversion for me? And so think of agentic AI. So Perplexity said that it can now basically go and do conversions for you by filling out the forms on a landing page. So that's kind of like really stupid news, I thought, because to have an AI agent figure out what are the fields on a page and then fill those out, well, that's what for decades we've been doing using APIs, where technology talks to other technology. And so this seems like a step backwards, but what's really cool is that the AI is doing it for you. So what if the AI actually knew how to talk to your API? And this is what actions are. So actions are a way for you and your business to tell ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini how to talk in a programmatic way to your website. So imagine that you're open table. You can feed into GPT what is the availability for your restaurants, and you can also make the booking through the action. So now you're going to have consumers figuring out what it is they want to do, what they want to buy through the chat agent. And then at the end of that conversation, they're no longer going to have to go to Google. They're no longer going to have to go to your landing page. They're just going to say, okay, I like it. Go ahead and buy it. It has your credit card information. It knows how to talk to your website. And so those conversions now also shift to the chatbot. And so these are 3 really big changes driven by large language models that are going to have an impact on how we think about digital advertising in the next year, but also the years to come beyond that. Now, these actions that you see here, we use those at Optmyzr, and you can use those for your business today. So what we do is we've taught GPT how to talk to the Optmyzr database and the Google Ads database that's connected to that. So you can ask it questions about, like, how is my account doing? And rather than hallucinating an answer, it actually uses the API to get current information about your account performance, and then it uses the large language model to narrate that in a way that's really sensible and that's really helpful. So this is something that's available to you today, and if you haven't used it, I recommend you check it out for your businesses. So that's the predictions. Now let me share a couple of more immediate things that you can do to use AI in really creative ways. So let's think differently about content. So I write a lot of blogs, I write a lot of social media content, and oftentimes it's a struggle to sort of like write things properly. Now, we've all had dictation programs and voice recognition, and that works quite well. But oftentimes we think about dictation as like, I have to craft the perfect message in dictation. But when I'm thinking, it's a stream of consciousness. There's thoughts, the thoughts evolve, they change. And so I found this app, it's called Talk Notes. It's not expensive, so I recommend you go and check it out. But basically, I will go for a walk around the office with my AirPods in, and I will just start talking, rambling about a topic that I want to write a blog post about. it is recording, and at the end of the conversation, it has a transcript, but it uses generative AI to turn that transcript into something a little bit more useful. So it says, okay, well, here's like all the ramblings from Fred, and he was repeating some points, and then maybe he contradicted himself, but he said, like, forget about the first thing I said, like the new thing that I said, that's the one we should use. It makes sense of that, and it turns it into, in this case, a blog post, right? So it takes ramblings into something more structured. Now, this app is really cool because you can tell it what output you want. So I can say here, I want a list of things based on my ramblings, or I want to do a podcast plan. And these are customizable. So it takes whatever stream of consciousness is in your head. You can just ramble, and you can get it out onto the page and much closer to something that's actually usable, right? And that is a fundamental shift in how we think about it. It's not dictation, it's about just talking, and the generative AI is going to make sense and summarize what it is that you were trying to say. Now, the thing different about content as well, so don't generate just one thing, you have to scale up. And this is the thing, when we look at GPT and we do these cool prompts and we generate like a description for maybe something in our product feed, that's kind of cool, but are we really going to sit there and do 10,000 prompts to fix our whole product feed? Well, no, right? We're agencies, we're digital marketers. We need to be able to do these things at scale. And so here was a really cool blog post, or it was a LinkedIn post from Katerina Mariani, and she said she was using an ad script to find trending search terms, and she was feeding those into GPT to generate ideas and outlines for newsletters she could send to her audience. Now, I thought that was a cool combination of putting different technologies together, but I didn't like it because she had to do some of this manually. So it wasn't really scaling the way that I like things to scale. Now, this was a great idea. And what I did is I literally went to GPT and I said, could we actually fully automate this end to end? So GPT ended up writing a script, which was finding trending search terms, automatically feeding those through the Google Ad script into GPT, and then spitting out an email that has the actual subject lines and the subjects and the little outline for those newsletters. So you can see the email there, it's fairly basic output. But the trick here is that that output is determined by the prompts that you put in the code. So what's important here is that you're able to connect a Google Ads account and the keywords in it to GPT to do something with it, to an email that gets generated to either you or whoever's in charge of your blog and newsletter. The prompts themselves within that code, those are easy to modify. So you can make much more sophisticated things, but all the pieces are here together to sequence and automate some of the tasks you might have been doing manually before. If you want that code, just grab the QR link right there. You can run it in your account today. Now, I was also thinking about scale, and so we have the landing page right there at Optmyzr for different products. Well, that landing page is built on a content management system, and many of you probably work with content management systems, whether that's WordPress or something more sophisticated. But what underlies that is a schema. This is the structure of the content that we put on, and then you have product description. So what I figured out to do is you can give this to GPT. So you can say, okay, GPT, here's the structure of my markdown, or here are the different fields that I need in a JSON format. And here is a list of the products that I want to describe. Can you combine those two and generate the markdown? And it generates the markdown at scale, so that all I have to do is take that markdown file or the JSON file, and I can just plug it into my database, into my content management system, and it's done, right? Imagine how much faster that is, rather than having to say to GPT, can you please generate the headline, and then copy paste the headline into the right field in WordPress, and then the description, and then copy and paste it into WordPress. No, skip that. All of this, use the markdown, tell the structure to GPT, and it will generate it for you. Now, let's think different about teams and get the bots to have meetings without you. So again, I write a bunch of blog posts, and one thing that I did is I built a bunch of custom GPTs to help me out with this. Now, the point here is, don't think of GPT as one thing that helps you. Think of GPT as a million potential coworkers, all with different skill sets, all with different perspectives. And what would you do if you had 1 million people working for you? How would you put them together? Now, I've simplified this. I've got 5 people working here for me when I write a blog post, but these are all custom GPTs where I specified what persona should they take, what kind of feedback should they give about writing that I do. And so the first one is Benedict Pierce. And Benedict I've made to be a very skeptical reader. And so here are the instructions. This is literally the custom GPT, which anyone can very easily build with a couple of like basic prompts. But I told GPT, Benedict is a skeptical person who likes to poke holes in articles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the persona for Benedict. So now when I give one of my blogs to Benedict, he comes back and it says, well, okay, here's 5 bullet points with reasons that I don't really like that blog post. I'm poking holes in it. Okay, that's great. But what I'm doing is I'm then sequencing this, and all 5 personas get to give their feedback on something that I wrote, because I don't want to get just the negatives. I also want to hear from a more positive persona. And I have a fact checker who checks that I'm not making stuff up when I'm generating some of this content using generative. The key thing is that if you build a custom GPT, you don't have to go to the custom GPT itself to have a conversation. And this goes back to the memory element. So actually, have your list of custom GPTs you like, and then start a generic GPT chat, but use the @ symbol. And using the @ symbol, it'll show you a drop down of the custom GPTs you have access to. And I sequence them. So I ask each of these 5 personas in order in the same chat to comment on my article. And because it all goes in the same memory, at the end, I have another persona, and their job is to take everything the others have said and consolidate that into just one output. So I'm not sitting there reading the output from 5 different personas. I have a GPT, custom GPT, that does that for me, right? And so imagine how that scales, because now, whether it's 5 people or 10 people or 15 custom GPTs, it basically scales up just as easily. It just takes a little bit more time, a little more GPT cost, but I can have so much more scalability, so many more different people looking at the stuff that I produce. Now, that leads into creativity. And one interesting point that I heard someone make was broad requests produce generic results. Specific requests will foster creativity. So if you give GPT a very generic prompt, you may not be very happy with the output, but the more that you put constraints in place, like make the article shorter, make the article more readable to a PPC expert who's been doing it for 10 years, write it specifically to someone who hates PMAX, right? All of these constraints that you put in place, that fosters creativity, and these custom, these language models are really good at creativity, but you have to give them sort of the parameters and the box in which they need to operate. Right. So if I have a generic request for a new ad for a flower delivery service, I get something like this. It's not bad, right? But it's not great. But now kind of put that together with the whole notion of all of these different personas from the last example I gave. What if I said, now localize this ad for a Parisian audience? So, hey, GPT, put yourself in the shoes of someone who lives in Paris and write an ad that they would find compelling for a floral delivery service. And GPT is really good at that. So they say this version that I've written focuses on élégance, which is French for elegance, and because that's something that might really resonate. So I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. But I don't know that that's actually correct until the next day after doing this. I come into the office, I turn on my TV, and there happens to be an ad for Air France on the TV. And look at the slogan for Air France: elegance is a journey. So again, élégance, elegance, it is exactly the word that GPT recommended I should use for a French audience. So clearly there's something there where GPT is really good at putting itself in someone else's shoes and taking on those different personas that you may not be able to take on for yourself. So you can use this for translation, you can use this for any number of marketing tasks by getting help from someone who has a different perspective on the world than you may have. Now, you can also take this notion of building audiences and take it one step further. Let's do a Google Ads example here. So what attributes of a hotel would a budget traveler really care about? Well, GPT spits out a bunch of things, and then I say, well, why don't you put this in a table and give me a bunch of the keywords that each of these sort of characteristics would equate to. Now, what I can do is I can take that list of the keywords for each of these characteristics, and I can build a custom audience segment in Google. So I can literally type in those keywords, I can copy and paste over the keywords based on that audience segment that I'm creating. So this is a really nice way to scale up your audience development by asking GPT to be the persona of who you are trying to market to. Now, let's think different about ability. So the thing that I love about GPT and all of these large language models is that it's no longer fine to say I can't. It's just that you haven't yet. At this point, I'm creating music, I'm doing statistics, I'm creating images. These are all things that I was not good at. In fact, I'm very bad. I can't sing, but GPT lets me sing. It lets me clone my voice. It lets me write scripts. It lets me put it to an orchestration. So things that I couldn't do before, it's just maybe you haven't tried it yet, but it is now possible in many cases. This is an image model. It's called Alpaca Machine Learning. It's really good at emulating styles, but one thing that I particularly like about it, which actually just came into this was just introduced in Apple Intelligence as well. So, but you can draw something on a notepad, and then you can say, can you turn this doodle into an actual picture? So I was at a conference, and the guy who was running it said, we're all going to meet on the beach at sunrise, and we're going to have the conference right there. So I doodled that on the little sketch pad within about 30 seconds in Photoshop with that large language model and the image model. I was able to get this sort of an output, which was pretty good. It was kind of representing something I could not have drawn, but through my doodle, I was able to do it. Also recommend Napkin AI. So this is really good at taking your text and generating some infographics with it. So a very quick and easy way to generate some visualizations of whatever you're writing. And then I also like ideogram. So one problem with generative AI image generators is that they often are really bad at spelling correctly. The text that they show is often really messy. This one is really good at putting text on stuff. So here I said, can you make me an image as if Optmyzr ran a billboard on Times Square, but this is the message. And the fact that we won the best PPC management software, that's actually a fact. But this image, like we did not run this ad in Times Square, but it's perfectly rendering the text that I asked it to. And so that is a really cool thing to be able to do. And you can sort of notice the text on the left side of the big billboard. That's your typical Gen AI output where the text is not readable, but the text that I put in, like this must be on the billboard, that stuff is actually correct. And so that's really cool and powerful. Now, as far as creativity, don't be limited, right? If you can use a marker, you can now write a Google ad script. Now, some of you listening today may be more SEO focused, so you can also write an app script for Google that does a bunch of SEO work for you. So how do you do this? Well, go to a whiteboard, basically put down the flowchart of what it is you're trying to do, take a photo of this, and thanks to the multimodality of all of these LLMs, it can understand what's in the photo and says, oh, okay, I understand the flowchart. It looks like this is the sequence of things you're trying to do. Let me go ahead and write you the script for that, and then you can run that script in your Google Ads account. It perfectly understands my writing. If it doesn't, you can obviously tweak it. And then you also can start asking the question, which model should I use? Now, I'm a heavy user of GPT, mostly because if I jump back and forth between the different AIs, I feel they're always leapfrogging each other. So basically all the same functionality eventually comes to all of them. It's just a matter of which one is first. And if I have to learn every large language model, it just takes more time that I probably would be better off spending going a little deeper on one. So looking at GPT, there are different models you can use for writing scripts. GPT 4o is less expensive, but it tends to work better if you're very specific about what the script needs to do. So you need to lay out all the steps and the sequence of do things in this order. So if you have that flow chart, great. It's really good at taking the flowchart, turning it into working code. But GPT-01 is the newer model. It is better at reasoning. It is much better with a short prompt that says, hey, I want to reduce my cost per acquisition. It'll figure out what might be good steps to achieve that goal, and it'll also write the code for that. So if you don't want to lay out every single step, 01 tends to be a better model. 01 is also, by the way, the only model, the first model where I've gotten it to write a script that works correctly without having to make changes on the first try. So that was really impressive to me. And so GPT-01 is good because it explains its reasoning. You can look at the reasoning and you can make sure you agree with the reasoning before you actually have it go and build the script for you. Now, if you're using the 4.0 model or you're using O1 and it's making some mistakes along the way, here's how you fix it. So you just tell GPT literally what the error is. You can take a screenshot or you can copy and paste it and say, okay, I ran the script, here's the error, can you go and fix it? It'll usually, after 2 or 3 tries, fix it for you. If that still doesn't work, you can also ask it to add explanation to its code so that you can, as a human, read along and sort of understand what is it trying to do in each step, and maybe you'll find a mistake. So in some cases, this helped me find mistakes with the date ranges that it was pulling, and that was causing errors. Or the third step is you tell GPT to add logging, and logging is basically the output that Google will write to the screen to say, okay, well, I found ads with high cost per acquisition, and this is how I calculated cost per acquisition. And so then you can start comparing what it shows on the screen to what you actually get out. Now, if you're going to copy and paste a script that somebody else has written, do be aware that there are security concerns, and not always, right? But there are potential security gaps. So I could write a script, give it to you in a QR code, and unbeknownst to you, that script could send me a full email with all of your account details. Now, I don't do that, but I've written a custom GPT script that you can use. You can give it a script that you found online that you were going to copy and paste into your account, and it'll spit out the summarization of privacy issues, data issues, any sort of security risks that you should be aware of before you actually start running that script in your account. So let's go with the next step here. So think different about possibility. So sometimes people are frustrated because Gen AI is hallucinating, or it's the output is not perfect. I see those shortcomings as opportunities. Obviously, this technology is going to get much better over time, but in the short term, these are opportunities for me to do something different. So many of you have probably used Notebook LM to generate automatic podcasts. Now, the downside of these podcasts is that they're mostly driven by sort of what the AI wants to talk about. Nowadays, Google has updated it so you can say focus a little bit more on these types of things, but the way the conversation flows is still driven very much by the AI, and you don't really have a lot of control over it. So if that is of a concern to you, you could create a better podcast. So you could take all of the announcements from an ad platform. You can go to GPT and you can say, write me a script for a podcast about all of these topics. And so it pulls factual data from these announcements that you've given it. It writes the script about the news. Now, actually, if you read closely, it says, write me the transcript, not the script. Here's the reason for that. If you ask it to write a script, the script is intended to be given to a human who's going to read it, but the human will stumble. They will repeat. They will have ums and ahs and pauses. If you give a script for narration to a text-to-speech generator, it's going to be too perfect because the text-to-speech system doesn't make the mistakes that a human makes. So what I did is I said, instead of writing me the script, please give me the transcript of how the human might have actually read it, where they stumbled, where they paused, etc. I give that transcript to the text-to-speech generator, and it sounds much more human than if you give it a script. So that was one thing. And then, so in this text-to-speech generator, which is available from OpenAI, you put it in there. And so that's how I am experimenting with generating automatic podcasts from PPC News. If you want to check out some of the example podcasts, you can use that QR code to find that podcast on your podcast engine. Okay, and then this is a really sort of weird one, but I do want to share because people tend to like this one. So I've hacked AI to read emails when they come in. So I have 3 kids. They're all in elementary school. I get way too many emails from the teachers about all sorts of things, and I just can't keep up. So what I told AI to do is if an email gets labeled as being from the school, GPT is going to summarize it, and then it spits out an email at the end of every day with a summarization of what I should have read in all of these individual emails from the teacher. So I use Zapier for this. So new email comes in, I give it to Zapier. Zapier cleans it up, gives it to GPT. I get a 3-sentence summarization, and then it puts it into a daily digest that gets released to me in the evening. The GPT instruction is right there. So I can just say something as simple as, summarize this email in 3 sentences or less. I could put in whatever prompt I want, right? I could make it shorter. I could make it more actionable. I can control this. Now, the next thing I did, I was like, well, why just get that email summary in my inbox? Why not just put it in a podcast? So I was still using Zapier. So I added one step to it. I said, I'm going to use the text-to-speech generator from OpenAI to take the summary email at the end of the day, generate it into a podcast episode, and put it in my podcast engine. So these are the steps that I added to that sequence from Zapier. And now I sit in my car, and along with the podcasts that other people produce that I listen to, I also have a personal podcast with my summarization of my email. So that is one cool way that I'm using AI and Zapier and kind of combining a lot of these technologies to do something a little bit more unusual. And then the final one I wanted to share was reading books. So as an author myself, one thing that frustrates me is that you're expected to write a lot of content, but at the end of the day, a book is has to be brought back to, like, say 250 pages. But you write 500 pages, and then you have to figure out what examples do I cut out of the book. But if you think about a book, like the end goal of the book is to teach people, like, the thing at the end. But how do you get them there? Well, you have to explain the thing before and the thing before. And so there's this whole build up to something. Now, the reality is that the people who read books are not all coming from the same starting point. So why is it that everybody gets the same book when they all could benefit from a custom book? Well, that just wasn't scalable. That wasn't doable in the past, just like Netflix is making movies for the masses. But what if Netflix could make movies for individuals? Think about that as an author or as a book as well, right? GPT is really good at this. GPT can actually take the points of a book, and because it understands the reader and where they're coming from, it can lead the reader right into the right portions of the book that build on what they already know, and just teaches them the new thing that the author is trying to communicate. So in essence, we should think about books and content not as a one-way street of communicating something, but as feeding the generative AI so that it can have a more meaningful conversation that communicates your key points to whoever the consumer is. And I think this is also an important point for SEOs out there. I mean, there's like this thing about, like, is content going to become less important? Well, I would argue content is becoming more important, because if you think about where the AIs are stuck in terms of growth, one of them is they need more power. So companies like Microsoft are literally turning on nuclear power reactors so that they can have more power available to build better language models. There's also a chip shortage, by the way. Like, NVIDIA can't produce enough chips to satisfy the demand. So that's another factor. But the third one is there's not enough content. It's already consumed so much content, and the only way that the large language model can get better is by having more content at its disposal. And if I think about that from the perspective of an author, like, why did I have to cut out a bunch of examples that explained what I was trying to communicate in my book? Well, I had to do that because my book had to be 250 pages. What if I could have given all of these additional examples that I cut out of the book to the large language model so that it becomes smarter about communicating the point that I'm trying to make? And so how I've used this personally is I have AI powered book discussion. So I might buy a book on Kindle, I convert the Kindle into a PDF, I give that PDF to GPT, and then I say, like, what are the key points that would matter to me? And then I start having a conversation, and it's almost like I'm talking to the author, and I'm not having to read that whole book, but I'm just getting the points that are the most salient and important to me. And so here's what I did. I took the same book and I said, can you give me the key takeaways for different personas, right? So the first one is a SaaS CEO. Okay, well, it talks about storytelling. And then if it was an SEM account manager, it's talking about testing consistently. And this was a marketing book, but I was like, well, what about if somebody was a therapist? Could that help them? Oh, well, there's some points in that book about personal connection. And so what's cool is that same book, the same messages from that book are communicated in different ways to different readers. And so that makes me more efficient at consuming new content and learning new things. But it's also a way for you to think about, like, how do you get your message into the world by feeding the LLMs all of this. So anyway, I know that was a lot of examples. Hopefully some of these you thought were pretty cool. You'll try it for yourself, but that's sort of what I've been doing with GPT. And if there are any questions, I would love to take those at this point.
All right, thanks so much, Fred. Yeah, there was so much in that presentation. I was taking notes myself, so I need to go back through these slides. Um, so I'm not seeing any questions. So if there's anyone that has any questions about anything that Fred covered, there was a lot of stuff covered today. Please put that in the questions box, and we'll get that answered.
Yeah, or if anyone has a cool example of something unique they've been doing with generative, would love to hear that. Tell people about it on this webinar. But yeah, if people want to follow up with me personally, you can also find me on LinkedIn. It's frederick@optmyzr.com is my email address. I would love for people to obviously check out my PPC management software. It's quite good and quite helpful, and we use a lot of generative AI in it to make you more efficient.
All right, so it looks like we have a question from Douglas. Do you see advertisements showing up in AI that's competing with Google? I think I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, I mean, Douglas, is a good question, right? So the ads in AI, are those going to compete with Google? So yes, obviously, I think what's most important here is that the consumer experience or uh, the experience of doing a search is dramatically shifting for the first time ever. And so more people are going to use Chat GPT or Search GPT or Perplexity to get the information they want. Now, Google is going to be fine because they're doing AI overviews and they have Gemini, and Gemini is, it's not my favorite, but it's also not bad. And they'll get there, right? But definitely different ways for consumers to interact with ads. And I think what's important for us as advertisers is we just have to be ready to be on that next platform. So when Search GPT enables advertising, we should be ready to put those ads up. But we also have to think, like I said, about ads may no longer just be a bunch of text. It may be an action. It may be you specifying. It may be like a merchant feed, right? Where you give a merchant feed to Google to do shopping ads. It may be more about like letting the GPT crawl your website because it'll generate better ads on the fly than you ever could. And it'll have a better way to convert those consumers without them ever going through your website. And so I think these are the broader things to think about strategically, like how is that going to shift how your team operates?
All right. Yeah, if there's any more questions, please put those in the chat. Yeah, Fred, one of the things you talked about, I loved the sequence of events that you go through to summarize your email. Um, I think that had to do with creating a custom GPT, right? At some point in that process, or was that specifically for the
No, so where I used the custom GPTs was the 5 colleagues who helped me review my blog posts. The emails that I get summarized and read to me in a podcast, there's no custom GPT in that. So it's a standard GPT model 3.5, which is quite cheap at this point. And I use Zapier to sequence the event. So what's important is the sequence of like I label stuff in Gmail that I want to go to the summarization, because obviously I don't want like um, updates and promotions that doesn't need to be summarized because every time you summarize and use GPT through the API, it costs money. So I want to limit it to the stuff that actually I want to get summarized. So that happens in Gmail through labels. That feeds it into Zapier. Zapier restricts the text because some emails can be quite long. So it says just take the first number of characters. That's probably going to be enough to at least give you a summary so that you know what this is about and what you need to know. And then it gives that to GPT for summarization. And then it uses Zapier to put that basically in a holding space where it can get summarized at the end of the day. So I don't have to get a summary every time an email comes in, but I just get it twice a day.
right? Cool. Looks like we have a question from Karen. How can you create an image in GPT?
Yeah, so I mean, in GPT specifically, it's DALI, right? So the model, you can say image generation is allowed. So in GPT-4, if you have a prompt that kind of implies you want an image, it should generally just call DALI and do the image generation. Um, I don't use it that much. I use Midjourney a little bit more. Ideogram.ai is the one that I like that puts text on the image. Um, Sora is very exciting, right? That's the video generation that OpenAI just announced and made available this week. But yeah, I mean, I think the most successful use cases that I see is where you start combining a couple of these AIs together. Um, so one thing that I did when I built my custom GPTs with my 5 personas for people helping me, I wanted to put little icons of what those people look like, and obviously they're made up. But I wanted there to be some level of consistency. So what I said to ChatGPT and DALL-E was, give me a mood board with like a 10 by 10 matrix with a variety of people. And so then that kind of gives me the mood board because it's one generation. So the people kind of like have the same style. And then I copy and paste each individual. And I give that as a base image to Midjourney when I say, generate me someone who looks a little bit like this in this style. So what I get back out of it is more consistent. Um, but yeah, anyway, that's a couple of image generators I use and sequencing things together like that.
Yeah, and you've mentioned the custom GPT. So if someone wants to create their own custom GPT, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, so custom GPT, you just have to be a paid subscriber. So you have to pay your $20 a month to GPT. And then in the top left corner, where you can choose the model that you want to interact with, there's a list of custom GPTs. There's thousands of them that have been built by other people that you can just use on the spot. There's a button that says plus make my own custom GPT. And then it's really, there's sort of a flow that it goes through. So it'll ask you a few questions. What do you want this GPT to do? But it all goes back to a set of instructions that you can tweak. So things that I will tell it is avoid words like delve into or dive into, the typical keywords that you see and you know, okay, that was generated by an LLM. Avoid hyperbole, don't use grandiose words. When you build that custom GPT, you can also give it PDF files or docs with your previous writing. So if you've written blog posts, you can just give it a list of everything you've written, and then it gets your ideas out of that. But it can also adopt your writing style from that. It's very, very easy to build. It literally takes 5-10 minutes. So if you have not looked at it, definitely recommend you do. And then there was a question of how do you sequence? So how do you get Sophie, the copy editor, to take all of the input from all of the custom GPTs and combine it? So the key thing is, if you go to GPT, you can go and look at a custom GPT and you can say, I'm going to talk to this custom GPT, Benedict Pierce, the skeptical reader. If you do that, you're stuck. That conversation is going to stay with Benedict and you can't go outside of that box that Benedict is in. But if you go to a generic GPT 4.0 chat, in the chat prompt, you can just put the @ symbol and it's going to give you a drop down of all the custom GPTs that you have access to. And that's where I type in @Pierce. And it says, oh, do you want to talk to Pierce Benedict, the skeptical reader? And I'm like, yes, that's who I want to ask. And then I tell him what to do. And then in the next prompt, in that same conversation, I put in the @ symbol. And then I say, bring in Sophie. Sophie can summarize what Benedict said to me. And that's how you combine all of these custom GPTs together with a single memory between them.
Wow. Well, it's clear that I've been underutilizing GPT myself, so I'm going to be taking some of these.
Yeah, maybe we can take some of these specific. I mean, there are great questions about how to do this, so I can put out some how-to guides, and maybe we can publish one on the Main Street blog if you guys want,
Yeah, that
and
would be
then
great.
readers can benefit from that.
Yeah. All right, we got a few minutes left, so last chance to ask Fred any questions.
All right, I'm sure everybody's off playing with their GPT ideas that I gave them. So thanks everyone for watching. And again, if people do have questions later on, just find me on LinkedIn. Happy to communicate there. But thanks so much everyone for joining us today.
Perfect. All right, just last last announcement. So, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, the link to this recording will be emailed tomorrow along with the slides. And like Fred mentioned, if you have any questions for him or want to check out Optmyzr, he's available on LinkedIn. And you can also go to optmyzr.com here at the bottom. All right, thanks everyone, and thanks so much, Fred.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.